So the key objectives and expectations. We want to discuss with you what is homeschooling. Where do we start? As part of that, we're going to touch on aspects of costs of homeschooling, methods and approaches, curriculums, exams. How do we know what grades our kids are moving through? We'll try and highlight resources that we as homeschooling moms use that, support us, as well as what kinds of forums and, groups we join to actually give us learner and parent support as well. So, we'll look at the socialization aspect as well as sporting and physical health. And most importantly, we're going to cover a few misconceptions that people have about homeschooling, right? What we won't cover in this session is any aspects regarding starting a tutor center or any kind of homeschooling learning center. Today's session is purely going to be around how a parent can investigate the concept of homeschooling for their kids. Okay, so I hope I've set the scene regarding what we're going to discuss and what your expectations will be for this session. All right, so I'm going to start. Before I introduce my panel to you, I actually want to start by asking you guys one question. Why? Why have you decided to log on to this webinar and find out more about homeschooling? Perhaps you're a parent who already knows that you do not want to take your child through a mainstream education medium, and this has always been the option for you. So you are starting your journey of investigation here, or enhancing your investigation. Or perhaps you're a parent finding yourself in this weird, peculiar situation where, due to the pandemic, you're too nervous to send your kid back to school. Perhaps you're just looking for an interim fix to allow your child to remain at home for the next couple of months and then finish their grade using online support systems while remaining in the safety of their home, and then have your child move back to mainstream school next year. So I want you to think about that question. Why are you joining this webinar? Why are you choosing to listen to this intro to homeschooling, right? Each of us have our own reasons, but it's important that we establish what they are. So as I go through this panel Q&A and knowledge sharing, please keep that why question in the back of your mind. Okay, so I think let's start with our introductions. As mentioned, I'm Davina Subramani, and I'm your facilitator or moderator for all intents and purposes. I call myself a homeschooling newbie because I've only been doing it for about 18 months. I was where most of you are right now, not too long ago, in this starting of my journey, questioning, being nervous, second guessing myself, not quite sure what to ask or who to ask or where to go to. So I completely identify, because it wasn't too long ago that I was there. I have two boys, 12 and 10, who did start off in the mainstream schooling system. And I then started to understand how that system was working. And I didn't fully believe that it was serving my children's education purposes very well. I actually wanted to have my kids more engaged with learning. I really didn't feel that they had a true love for learning. It became, going to school seemed more like a kind of punishment to them than them wanting to go there and loving to learn. So I actually started off by wanting to explore how I can create independent learners who would begin to identify their passions through the discovery of the world. And that's what led me to my homeschool journey. So my hope is with this webinar, you all get to, share in the information that we're going to present to you today and understand the true aspects and benefits of homeschooling. And this is just a starting point. This is just an overview and a briefing. It is in no way a deep dive or deep analytics around homeschooling concepts. Today, it's to give you high-level information so that you're aware of what you need to explore further if you're deciding to do the homeschooling approach. Okay, so first I would like to introduce my first panelist. Her name is Sonia Hawkins. Sonia is not just a homeschooling mom, but she has been homeschooling, actually she's been one of the pioneering homeschoolers since it became legal to homeschool in South Africa. Sonia, please introduce yourself to our participants.
Yeah, good evening to everyone. It's really a lovely opportunity that Davina's created for us to just chat to each other and, just speak from our own hearts as homeschooling moms. I've been homeschooling for many, many years, 20 plus years. I found out about homeschooling shortly after my eldest son, which is turning 24, was born. And I thought, I don't even know what this concept is and how it works. And I started my investigation, reading in books and the books that were available. And, I was absolutely fascinated by how children learn and how their brains develop and how one can actually support them. So, I've made it an extensive study to understand how the brain works. And I must say, through the years, I not only homeschooled my own 2 children, but I've had the opportunity to also homeschool other people's children as well. And you start seeing what works and what doesn't work. And it's really amazing to see children gaining confidence again and starting to love learning and experience learning on a new level.
Perfect. Thank you, Sonia. So my next panelist, her name is Roxanne Shumi. Roxanne is an entrepreneur as well as a homeschooler for many years, and she's my go-to person for anything regarding social, mindfulness, nutrition, sporting aspects of homeschooling for my kids. So Roxanne, please introduce yourself to our participants.
Thank you, Davina, and good evening, everybody. I'm Roxanne Chumi, and I'm an holistic health and wellness therapist, energy healer, and mom of 2 beautiful little girls. Joshua, aged 11, turning 12, and Tanisha just turned 7. Now, we have been an eclectic homeschool family for just a little over 8 years now, and we have found ourselves taking this path and not choosing mainstream, because we are confident in knowing that our children have the best possible resources available to them by us taking on their education. Now, being a successful homeschool graduate myself, I've seen firsthand the pros and cons of choosing this path. And I can, however, confidently say to you today that being given the opportunity to choose correspondence study over a formal classroom setup allowed me to develop into the best academic version of myself. And this same opportunity to grow and learn freely is one that I wanted to share with my children. Now, the narrative for quite a few homeschooling journeys shares a similar flow. And like Davina, I also battled accepting the norms of trying to fit my girls into a box. In 2013, after a school readiness assessment, I was very bluntly advised by an occupational therapist to consider Ritalin and remedial classes to successfully cope with Joshua's ADHD, dyslexia, and an inability to remain silent and sit still in a classroom. I remember thinking to myself that I was definitely not going to medicate my 5-year-old, and seeing and knowing the passion that she had for wanting to learn, holding her back for a year wasn't an option either, but continuing to home educate was. Fast forward 7 years later, a few weeks away from turning 12, I have a beautiful, caring, social butterfly who has a passion for literature, numeracy, and aspires to be successful as an adult in any career of her choosing. The academic achievements and milestones that has been reached with my children have been astounding, and having the opportunity to see this progress and growing passions daily is why I am an advocate for homeschooling.
Beautiful. Thank you, Roxanne. That was a great introduction. And I think you've actually just given all of our viewers a lot of confidence in homeschooling. So my next panelist, her name is Riyanta Sherdran. Rianta has become an extremely valuable part of my homeschooling resources, not just because she helps me access all the books and educational resources that I need for my kids, but Rianta has actually now become my very good friend and my sounding board. Right, so Rianta is an entrepreneur as well as a homeschooling mom. Rianta, please introduce yourself.
Hi everybody, I'm Rianta. I live like 3 roads maybe away from Davina, but I don't see her that often because life is busy. I've got 2 kids. Leah is just turned 12 last month and Asha just turned 7, so we had 2 lockdown birthdays and lots of chocolate cake. Yeah. This is our 3rd year homeschooling. It's been fun. It's been busy. We have our crazy, daunting days. This all started when we had issues with the private school Leah was in. So we decided to start homeschooling her. It's been going great. I will not send her back. It's been the areas we struggle in, we will find our way around. But we are very happy with the way life's turned out. Asher had a different journey. He's just turned 7. He has speech delays, so school proper normal size classrooms wasn't an option for us with Asher. So we opted for a tutor. We have a tutor who I take him to a male tutor in our area for 3 hours every morning. And so 11:10, he's back home riding and racing. We're racing around the house with him, and we're trying to fit in schooling, and it's crazy. It's busy, but it's a huge change if you look back to our lives 5 years ago. But you get to know your children in a different way, and you begin to understand how you can actually create so much of impact, as opposed to having them go to school and seeing them 5, 6, 7 hours later. It's amazing the impact that we can make in our kids' lives, and I wouldn't change that forever.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rianta. Lastly, I would like to introduce to you Rebecca Liebenberg. Now, Rebecca astounds me with her knowledge of all aspects homeschooling. She's been doing it successfully with multiple kids, and she's just very au fait with all facets, from the Department of Education to the Pestalozzi Trust and legal aspects. And yeah, she's one-stop homeschooling shop. So Rebecca, please add to that.
Thank you very much, Davina. Can you hear me all right?
Perfect.
Great. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for having me on your panel, Davina. I'm a mom to 4 children, and I have homeschooled most of the way, but my children have also been in public and private schooling. We've used tutors. I still use tutor centers. I've also homeschooled my nephew for 2 years during that period when he was younger, and he went back into mainstream in grade 6. I took my oldest children out of junior school and I started homeschooling them when my 3rd child was just starting grade 1. My youngest was almost a year old at the time, so I had my own 4, and that was in 2008. And then in 2010, my nephew joined us for 2 years. So we had a lot of children, and it was tough going when they were little. My 2 older children went back into school to finish their Cambridge AS and A levels into a private school. And my middle child also went into school for 2 years just to do her IGCSEs, but we decided that wasn't working out too well. So she came back home to finish. She'll be done with this year with her matric, and she plans to study business and economics next year at university. My eldest is studying mechanical engineering. She's also working 2 jobs part-time, and she's left home now, so she lives in her own place. My son is studying music. He's currently also doing a trading course, and he works part-time. And my youngest, who's 13, is still doing our eclectic homeschooling. She plans to start with Cambridge next year, possibly, but will only start doing exams when she's about 16 years old. I don't believe in extensive testing for children until they are emotionally ready for it and actually want to be tested. All my children only started testing around about grade 10 level. I've got quite a lot prepared here to say. I didn't realize I'd written this much. I want to just say that homeschooling is going through quite a metamorphosis. It has been for some time now. Many people are convinced that homeschooling preschool is as academically relevant, and others consider that this is exclusively a parent's role. So I'm going to briefly tell you what my journey entailed, and you can decide what you think constitutes homeschooling or not, because it can be quite a personal perspective. I believe that many parents are blending homeschooling and parenting functions into one thing. And while there is some merit to this, we need to distinguish between where regular parenting and home education starts to separate into differing roles. According to the South African law, home education is when the parent facilitates the academic learning of a child that they would receive in a school, in terms of an institution. It doesn't really include school readiness and early childhood development and early socialization. It's generally understood that when you send your child to school, they're emotionally, cognitively, and psychologically ready to deal with this separation anxiety when they leave their parents, as well as dealing with other new adults and a group of new peers who may or may not have similar life experiences or a frame of reference, that they can relate to. So it's taken for granted that this child can now cope with all of that as well as learn on a formal academic level. And this is where most of us part ways in our estimation of what parenting and homeschooling is and is not. So I was one of those mothers who basically started from the moment my child was, I found out I was pregnant. Learning was everything. And that resulted in me having children who were extremely responsive and intuitive from the moment of their births. And I was very much in tune with my children. So the early schooling years and our early homeschooling years was very much an engaged process. And for me, this is very, very key to what homeschooling is.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Rebecca. And I like that you gave us a quick overview of what your homeschooling journey looked like. To stay with you, Rebecca, actually, I know this, and coming back to my why, I guess, I know there's quite a few parents that are probably looking at interim schooling solutions, right? So they're looking, just to keep their kids safe at home now, because a lot of them are stressed, a lot of them are worried, they don't quite feel comfortable to let their kids return to, the physical school premises, but they want their kids to continue their schooling, but remain in the safety of their homes, and then continue their journey, back at mainstream in 2021. How can we address and how can we help advise and alleviate some of their concerns?
Okay, this is quite a big topic, but to put it succinctly, if I can, if you plan to put your children back into school, then you really have to keep them working at the same pace that they have been doing in a school. They have to keep to the same context that they were doing with their schoolwork. So they would never have to make the shift of coming from school into home. They actually need to still continue thinking of I'm at school now. So that's their context of their education, which means that you're going to have to cover very specific material, and you don't have much room to deviate or modify the work to suit your child, whether this is good for them or not. Your schooling will not be an organic process, and it will be determined externally from the school that you're working with, the curriculum you're using, the teacher that you're working with. So you'll need to stick to this in order to keep on track so that your child can slot back in, from whence they left. So, that is quite different from homeschooling. So we don't like to call this homeschooling as such.
Schooling.
Does that answer it enough? Should I go more into that?
I think you've made this very, very clear. And I want to, if any of the participants here are finding themselves in that situation where they know they're just scared for now, they want to keep their kids in the safety of their home, but they have all intentions of putting them back into their regular schooling routine from next year, then please be mindful of what Rebecca's just discussed. And I think also it's important to discuss this with your school. Explain to them you're not comfortable to allow your child to return to the physical school building, but you do want to continue their schooling, and what options can the school help you with? How can they help you ensure that your child stays on track so that they can return, to school next year, if that is your intention?
I would like to mention one thing. Because we're in the middle of the year already, the parents will have the children's work planned for the year. They will have the textbooks. They already know the path that the child is walking for the rest of the year. So it's not really necessary for them to go and buy new things or slot into new modes of education using service providers for the rest of the year. This is not necessary. They can continue using what they already have. They shouldn't feel pressurized into spending more money. And so long as they're keeping in communication with the child's teachers, and I see most teachers are very, very helpful. I've only heard wonderful, wonderful things. Just stick to the syllabus. Keep up with what your child's teacher is planned, and then realize that you are not actually the facilitator in this case. The teacher is the facilitator, whereas you as the parent are now helping the teacher deliver the work, which is not the same role as a homeschooling parent who becomes the facilitator and there isn't a teacher authority body overseeing any of it. So the roles are slightly different. The content will be very specific, and a teacher and parent relationship has to really become very strong for the sake of the child.
Good. Then I'm going to ask you, what then is homeschooling? And if you can then also touch on something, because when I first started my journey of investigation and exploration, I started coming across terms like D schooling, unschooling, and I was like, what is this? Right? So I think it's very important, because there's a lot of parents that are on this webinar right now that have probably started some of their own investigations, and they would have also come across these terms. So I think it'll be good, Rebecca, if you can just give a brief highlight of what is homeschooling in the way we are trying to introduce it to them, and then what is the deschooling and unschooling. Guys, just to remind you all, again, like I said, this is not a full unpacking of all concepts, because we only have an hour and a half. We can't go through everything in this intro. So today we're going to share with you the high-level concepts, and hopefully we're going to do a few more webinars where we can unpack in more detail. But Rebecca, please share with us the difference between these.
Okay, so homeschooling in essence is when you as the parent take on the responsibility to homeschool your child in your own home. This means that not only are you responsible to make sure that it happens, but you're also accountable to prove that you're doing it and that you have done it in the past. So that goes to the assessment and the minimum requirements, that kind of thing. But it's not necessarily removing your child from education. It's just a different way of looking at education. And there are only 3 modes of education allowed in South Africa, according to law. So we've only got that to work with currently. And it is changing, but we have to work with what we've got. So you've got public schooling, private schooling, and homeschooling, and that's all that's allowed. So if your child is not in a public or a private school, which is registered, you are homeschooling. And homeschooling means you are facilitating the schooling of your child at home. It doesn't cover the cottage schools and any other kind of small informal school which isn't registered. We're not going to talk about that today because it gets very complex, but that's just the basic overview of that. Now, the difference between unschooling and deschooling, it's not really something one can compare anyway. Unschooling is one of the approaches of homeschooling. So when you homeschool, you can do it in the manner that you feel is going to fit you the best and it's going to work well for your children. You can do a bit of research on what pedagogy is and what you would like to do for your child. And a lot of things that you look at, you will find won't work, but you need to look for those things that is going to suit your child. So depending on what kind of learner your child is, if there are special needs, also how your personality works with delivering the material, if you'd need help, all that sort of thing. So unschooling is an approach. Unschooling is specifically a child-led approach, and it's an approach to the content which is different. It doesn't mean that you can't or you shouldn't cover the outcomes that a child needs to do in each grade. It just means that you're going to approach it in a very different way. It needs a lot of discussion, so we can't really go into detail. It is very labor intensive for the parent. There are a lot of people who think unschooling means doing as little as possible. It's very much not the case. I did it for a while. I must say it's probably one of the most difficult approaches I used. It is a tremendous amount of work, and you have to do a lot of preparation for something that you would want your child to learn incidentally. So you're doing a lot of background encouragement for the child, but the child doesn't experience that. The de-schooling is something completely different. De-schooling is something you're only going to do if you want to permanently homeschool, and that is just a period of time that you take to help your child shift their mental understanding of where the education is coming from and what the point of it is. It's basically changing context from an institutionalized kind of education to now I am learning at home with my mom, and I am responsible for my education together with my mom, and there isn't a teacher who's going to spoon feed me. So that's the context shift, and deschooling really just refers to that period of time which you're going to work through with your child to change that context. You should not be doing this if you're going to put your child back into school because you specifically don't want to change their context. You want to keep up with what you're doing. That's it in a nutshell, I think.
Yeah, I think you touched on it and you explained it quite well. So especially parents who currently have kids that are in mainstream school, and you're seriously thinking of moving them into this homeschooling environment, right? Sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, you should take 6 months or a year and de-school. Basically, what you want to do, if I could say it in a very, layman's way, is you want to take them and you want to let them let go of everything they've been conditioned with at a mainstream school, so that they're opening up themselves to learn from the world and the environment around them in a different way. So sometimes it's very helpful to de-school them. When you start them off in their homeschooling journey, if they're coming out of mainstream school, especially. Okay, so now one of the, every time I get somebody calling me about and to ask me about homeschooling, one of the first questions they ask me is, how much does homeschooling cost? Now, I know there's no one straightforward answer to give you. I can't say it costs $5.99 and then you can budget $5.99 and you can continue. It doesn't work so easily, unfortunately. I have found that costs will vary depending on what options you are choosing. Curriculums also come into play here, but I'm actually going to direct this question to Sonia, who she actually helped me when I was doing my investigations and explorations around this. Sonia?
Yes, Davina, this and everybody else, this is a very interesting question. And I think a lot of parents that start off in homeschooling are very overwhelmed, like you mentioned before. And it's like trying to find a book in a library that you don't even know if it's alphabetical, you don't know where it is, and it's just massive, and it's just one book after another. And there's lots of aspects that, you've got to be looking at, like curricula is always there, resources people have to think of, maybe possible outings. Schoolers are very fond of outings, and Roxanne will cover that part for us. Then things like stationery and special stationery. Maybe there's a special interest your child has that you need to invest in. And then, of course, the extramurals. Homeschoolers really enjoy the extramurals. So, once one starts homeschooling, you're working from your actual child, and then you're working out from there. I think that's an important approach to take, because many times we think, okay, well, our answers are out there somewhere. If we could just find the website or just find the curricula, then everything will be solved. And this is the beauty of, like Rebecca was mentioning, of de-schooling, because what are we doing? We are connecting with our child, finding out what makes my child tick, why is my child maybe not functioning as they should in a normal system? What is their natural way of learning, and how does their brain organize itself for learning? And then start from the child's perspective, and then start looking at that, and then bring in resources and books, and then think of curricula. So it's a very exciting journey. I think everybody can find something that's really affordable for them. And, you know, just if you just take a little bit of time. And I think in the deschooling period as well, I'm sure all those at homeschool will agree with me, it also gives you that breather to say, okay, well, what am I going to do as you get used to what your child is about? But super exciting adventure that we are on. And like Rayanta was saying, wouldn't take it back for anything.
Yes, yes. And there's something very important that you touched on, Sonia, and you know, learning styles. I remember when I started my journey, and I was obviously introduced to you, very fortunately, I was introduced to you, and you helped me because I wanted to investigate and I wanted to know whether my kids would actually manage learning in a home environment, firstly. Secondly, I was like bewildered. I had no idea that there was learning styles. The only style I knew was my kid needs to read his book, he needs to do his homework, and then he must know, you know, his subject. But you actually unpacked that for me, because I came and did a learning styles assessment, and we looked at their intelligences, and that actually helped me understand what would be the right type of curriculum and approach for them. I think it'll be beneficial to, you know, to the participants if you elaborated a little bit about that, Sonia.
Okay, Davina, I will do. It's just interesting that we all have a different brain organization for different tasks that we do. And when we become aware of the brain organization or the brain profile of the child, along with the learning styles, we get a more complete way of working with that child so that they can learn naturally. So, you know, and sometimes it's a bit difficult because what kind of learner is my child? And that's why the session we had together was so useful for you.
Yes.
We could focus on what was your children's needs, and not only what your children's needs are, but what is your needs as a mom, because you are going to be working together as a team. So how do I cope under stress? What happens when I get stressed? What does my brain look like? How do I react? And this is wonderful sort of non-verbal communication that our kids can be giving us so that we can provide the correct resources for them.
That is so brilliant, because like I said, you know, my son, who was in mainstream school, used to often get in trouble for talking too much. And I used to actually reprimand him almost every day when I would get complaints from the teachers telling me, you know, he's not listening, he's always talking. But then it made me actually realize through the assessment that he is a child that needs to retell what he thought he just learned. So by talking and saying it back to his friends or talking to his friends, he's actually then allowing it to settle in for himself, you know. And sometimes as parents, we're not fully engaged with that part. We don't always understand that about our kids, that, you know what, they learn in different ways, you know. Some of them are more visual, some of them are auditory. So I think if I had to share a little tidbit with parents, if you are truly interested in understanding your child and really putting them on a good footing, before you start spending money on buying a curriculum and signing them up with all kinds of online resources, do yourself a favor. Go and investigate learning styles, right? You can do it with, you know, somebody who's a practitioner, you know, and then look at their intelligences, because kids, every single kid, I promise you, every single kid is born with talent, some talent, every single one of them. And it's our duty as parents to try and help them uncover that and actually further develop it and give them opportunities to explore it. So I know all of you here because, you know, your kids are really important parts of your lives and you want the best for them. So I'm giving you a little bit of advice here. Try and investigate, you know, learning styles as well as in the intelligences. Okay, so now that we've shed some light around the cost aspect, it's not as, you've probably now understood, it's not as straightforward as asking a question, what will it cost me? There's various aspects that you need to consider, you know, from stationery to books to outings to the type of curriculum you want to use, etc. The next thing that I'm usually asked, and this is an important one, how do you know what grade your child is in? I mean, how do you tell that your child is learning and progressing? Do they write exams? I mean, how do you really know your child is actually learning against some kind of recognizable standard, you know? So, Rianta, in your experience, how are you managing to identify that your child is learning? How is it that you work with your daughter, for example?
Thanks, Davina. So when we started, it was also something that stressed me out, that I always thought like we would have to have a year-end exam or a mid-year exam or a test after every module or chapter we did. And I very soon came to realize that if you're working one-on-one with your child, it's like if you think of a class situation, a teacher who's teaching a group of 12, 15, 20, 25 kids, they're not going to fully know that every single child has reached the desired level of learning. And the only way to do that is by giving them a blanket test. But when you're sitting one-on-one with your child, you will know very quickly whether your child has actually grasped it or is actually just like messing around and not even listening, or is like totally into it. You will know. And once I realized that, what is the point of a test? You can actually, once you've taught your child, you can actually know whether your child is actually going to get in the 90s for that test or 40 or 50%. So what is the point of it? If you know your child hasn't grasped it, you work further and yes, you recap and you practice some more. And it becomes an instinctive thing where you know where your child is at because you're working one-on-one with them.
Yes.
So what Leah and I always say, it's like something I've said it numerous times over the past 3 years with her, is practice makes perfect. Absolutely. And we apply that in like everything we do. Every time she like moans at me that I'm asking her to do it again, I tell her, just remember, practice makes perfect. So I become like a little parrot sometimes. but very often it's what gets us through, and it helps her to understand that actually by the end of recapping the second and third time, and then a week later I've asked her to recap again with me, she knows it. There's things I can remember that in our first December when we left school, I remember reading a history book together with her for the first time we ever did history. And up till today, she can tell me what is an historian, what is an archaeologist, and she's like a little parrot to me now. Because the recapping reinforces concepts, and we've gotten used to it. Yeah. And we actually there is no place in our lives for test or examinations any longer. Right. It doesn't serve the purpose that we think it serves. Right. So very often throughout the year, we would use school-based like little workbooks and things that are grade relevant. Mm-hmm. And we use that just to make sure that we're not going too far off a formal curriculum. So if they have done fractions in grade 6, we know that somewhere in that year of grade 5 or grade 6, we would have touched on fractions. If she reaches a point where she can't do something that's in any of the grade related books, then we know, okay, we need to see where we missed this out on, and we fill it in. So okay. The school-based resources or workbooks that you come across in stores and that are freely available sometimes is just to keep us on track. But there is no place in our lives for tests or examinations.
Okay. I think that's a very good response, that, we're very conditioned to think standardized testing is the only way to ascertain if your child is learning. And if you are homeschooling, you are going on a journey of educating the whole child, not just to prepare the child to pass a test or an exam. There is a bigger concept around learning that homeschooling explores. But that being said, it's always easier to do it with kids that are in, younger grades, primary school grades, if we had to assign a grade to the phase, But there are various ways and methods that would come into play here that parents need to investigate. Sonia, you having had 2 kids that have gone through the complete homeschooling regimen, how can you elaborate a little bit around options of testing and when?
Thanks, Davina. Yeah, I really just suggest the same thing that Rebecca does. You can sort of in primary school really work on setting a good foundation with the child, only moving on when they've actually mastered something. That's really important, because what happens in the school system, and to no fault of the teachers, because they're managing a lot of children, we really do understand. But in a homeschool situation, we ideally look at where the child is, and we only progress once they've mastered that specific part of the work. So with a subject like maths or languages, it's really important to have that foundation nice and strong. And we do that through various ways and various methods, like Charlotte Mason method, traditional sort of classic method. And they all have got their good properties that will suit different kinds of children. Yes. I also remember Roxanne was mentioning Eclectic. It's a very, very nice method to use. So once the foundation is laid properly, and of course it's really is very organic, and parents are actually connecting with children, you start seeing that the children become more excited about learning, start investigating things for themselves, and it gives you quite a strong indication of what they are capable of. So when one moves towards grade 10, that's really a year that you want to have something formal in place, so that you can actually progress later, because if they would like to go to university or whatever, a very good thing to investigate is what the Finland schools have done. They've been mentioned as the best educated children in the world. There's quite a few YouTube videos, and we will share some. I've shared one that Davina will send to everyone. Go and look at that. The Finland children have a more friendly approach to their whole even school system, and it is a lot of what us as homeschoolers are actually doing already. So have a look at that. That's really something really important. Another aspect I just want to mention is a lot of homeschoolers, when they think of homeschooling, they're thinking South Africa because we are in South Africa. Fair enough, but what becomes interesting with this online option that we've got is you can actually study a degree in another country. Yes. And there's an interesting option that my son has actually also picked up. There are some universities that would actually, give like a free sort of university degree for people that come from other countries. So, for example, Germany, you can go and study in Germany for free when you are a foreigner, but of course you need to have mastered your German, that you can actually find tuition in German. So there's many options online. So don't just think South Africa, think international. My son and my daughter are fortunate enough to have an international matric, and of course the South African equivalent to that. So that there's possibility for them to study wherever they like. Just consider that for our older children.
Yeah, I think that's very important. One of the things, and just speaking now around, the grading and, knowing how your child is progressing, etc. I remember when I first told a family member, a close family member of mine, that I was going to take my kids out of mainstream school and start homeschooling them. He looked at me really perplexed. And his first question was, so how will you do that? I mean, you're not a qualified teacher. How will you teach your children? And that is a question I think almost all homeschooling parents have encountered at one point or another. So Rayanta, if I can ask you your experience, I mean, how are you managing to work with your daughter? How are you helping her to learn? And is it possible really for your child to be able to learn from you, even though you're not formally qualified as an educator?
Okay, so Leah's in grade 6. Certain subjects are getting a bit challenging for me, like Afrikaans.
Yeah.
So in those types of subjects where I admit we would need help, we are actively searching for tutors and things, and we have quite a few options lined up for the next 6 months to the end of the year to try out. Because we already had a few sessions with a tutor, and we're quite happy. But basically, no, you don't need to be an expert. Very often we learn together. I read up a few minutes ahead of time if I need to, or we read together. I help her understand the things she needs to understand. We use YouTube videos. We do science experiments. She joins science workshops that are in our area if we need to for certain topics, or regularly. You don't need to be an expert. You learn with your child. And very often what I find helps a lot is we use real life experiences. So when we needed to bake the chocolate cake, it was actually my birthday that we did, just for the sake of maths, we doubled the recipe. So she had to double every single ingredient and calculate it and figure out which cups to use. And then during lockdown, my hubby's car wouldn't start. So we went into a whole combustion and learning more about science in that area. And we actually hadn't covered those topics before. So it was good to have a reason to pull out the science encyclopedia and then look up some kind of physics that we haven't yet delved into. So no, you don't need to be an expert, and we can help each other learn together. And the resources out there we're never lacking for resources. Even if we can't find a book, the YouTube is amazing. So there is no such a thing as we're stuck. It's beyond my means. And in the country we underestimate the help there is out there. There's tutors, there's students who are doing excellent work at university and are looking for ways to use their free time. There's lots of tutors around who can help you once a week, even only once a month, if that's what we can afford for that month. So there isn't a case of, I'm not an expert, my child needs to go back to school.
Perfect. Very, very well put. So if I can then ask you, keeping on the, the area of curriculums and approach, in your household, what kind of curriculums are you using and what approach do you use?
So with us, time is of the essence. So we don't have time to do every single subject every day, and we don't have the strict routine where we're starting at 8 and we're stopping at a certain time. Leah works throughout the day. Some days I find her doing Afrikaans at like 5 in the afternoon while I'm packing orders for the courier to come. She's suddenly doing Afrikaans. So it's a matter of whenever she feels the need to fit things in, because I give her a set amount of things to do, and I give her a few days to do it. So it teaches her time management, where she needs to know that a certain thing has to be done by midweek or by the end of the week, and she needs to do it. Whether she does it at 5 in the evening or at 8 in the morning, it really doesn't matter. It's when she is energized and motivated to do the work. So we don't have any strict routine in terms of that. And our curriculums, we follow an eclectic approach. So for maths, we're quite strict in terms of that we make sure we don't fall behind. Even if it's something that she's struggling on, we spend more time with it and we get through it. Even if it means where we need to look beyond the resources we have. It's just something that has to be done. She has to do it. We move on. If we recap a month later, if it is something she struggled with, but we do give some leeway with Afrikaans and science, but with maths and English, she knows that those are the core subjects. It doesn't matter how much you like or don't like it. This is what's done, and we're doing it. So I actually now in the last 6 months, I don't get any more complaints about, do we have to do this? Why do we have to do this? Can't we just skip this? We've gone beyond that. She knows she's big. Now she needs to buckle down, and she needs to do her work religiously. So it works well for us. And it as they get bigger and they understand the relevance of education in our total lives, work becomes less of a struggle. They begin to see the relevance and the importance of it, and they understand that to achieve a certain type of lifestyle, you need to educate yourself, and it becomes something that older kids will understand, and it makes sense for the family to grow together with that kind of thinking.
Yes, beautifully put. And, just to summarize on that, so you're using an eclectic approach, and I also find that works very well with my kids. So instead of just subscribing to one specific curriculum for everything, we find that we look at language arts from the good and the beautiful, for example, and science from there, and then we use Matthew C, which is a really excellent math program. But again, it depends on your child's ability and their progress, and what will actually fit their learning style best. So just as a reminder to everybody listening, when it comes to curriculums, try to understand what will work best for your child from understanding their own learning styles, right? I will be compiling a list of all kinds of resources that we found helpful, including forums, etc. And I will be sharing that with everybody that's RSVP'd to the email, okay? Now, I know there's a lot of parents there who have kids that are in high school or in the high school phase, and they are all worried about, will my kid go to university? What do they need in terms of entrances? What are recognizable senior certificates for admission purposes? And Rebecca, you have kids in this phase. How are you preparing your kids for life after homeschooling? What is it that we need to tell our parents out there that they should be cognizant of if their kids are in high school and they want to move on to studying? And not just what Sonia mentioned earlier, not just studying here within South Africa. Maybe you have aspirations of your child studying abroad. So what is nationally and internationally recognized? I know it's a big question, but
no, it's fine.
And hopefully, you can share some insights with us.
Before I talk about that, I just want to continue with your topic you just finished with what Rayanta was saying about the eclectic schooling, and I just want to mention to parents that, and this goes to specifically high schooling, you actually have to start homeschooling with the end goal in mind.
Yes.
This is actually very, very important, because to be able to map your pathway that you're now going to travel with your children, you've all got to work towards something. And now as you grow from each phase, development with your child, things are going to change for you, your circumstances might change, and your children change because they're growing. They change a lot. So what you start out using for preschooling and the early grades might not work for you if you go into the next phase, and then whatever you change to might not work for the high schooling either. So you really need to remain open-minded about this, and you need to sort of keep your ear to the ground to see what is available out there. Talk to a lot of other parents and connect with your child, like we've been saying, and let them become part of the custodians of their education, so they can also choose the things that they would like to do. I also personally like the eclectic approach very much. And just to basically tell people what that is, it is when you as a parent take bits and pieces from many parts of curricula. You sort of basically take facets to build a whole. But it is important to always keep a core as your center, your grounded part. And most people use maths and their mother tongue as their core. For us, it was English and maths. So you would look at a really good curriculum or aspects of various good curriculums. Like we also use the Maths You See. We really like that. That was our maths core. And we used literature-based part of a curriculum as our English core, and around that we build everything else, and that changed from year to year, sometimes a couple of times in the year, but we kept the maths and the English core going all the way through. And this is where it ends up in the high school years, where you've got your level of linguistics and your numeracy and your literacy are strong, so that you can cope with what you're going to choose now in your phase of further education and training. So now if you've done this with your end goal in mind, you would have been careful throughout all of that to make sure that your children, if your child has got something like dyscalculia, which is an inability to manage with numbers, you would eventually have discussed this with your child. And obviously your child's not going to go into a commerce subject or medicine or something like that. So you would start looking at university options, college options, perhaps technical training, vocational training, anything that would fit in for your child. So that would be your end goal, and you would start catering for that before you actually start doing those last 3 years, because you can't start grade 10, which is actually, it works like this. It's grade 10, 11, and 12. We should actually stop seeing it as grade 10, then grade 11, then grade 12. We need to start seeing education as moving from one phase to the next, because those 3 years that you work within each phase, you're actually building on a whole. And so the high school years, when you enter that and you're now thinking of, let's just use university as an example, because it is the highest order that most people aspire to, and you have to get really good grades to get into university. So if your child wants to go to university, it is advisable that you do maths all the way through, because if you don't have maths, it closes a lot of doors for most undergraduate studies. Not all, but most. It really limits your choice if you don't have maths. So I know that's a tough call, but I made that a non-negotiable for my children, because I'm really terrible at maths, and I didn't do maths. I didn't finish it. I had to do typing instead, which serves me very well now. But so many doors were closed for me when I wanted to study, and I discovered things while I was studying that I wanted to do, and the requirements all needed me to have a really good maths mark for matric, and I didn't. So I decided we're not going to go down that road. Whether they struggle with it or not, they're doing maths. It was maybe a bit harsh, but that's, each parent gets to decide for their kids.
Yes.
So each university has their own requirements as well. So this is one of the things that makes it very difficult in the end when you're now going to apply for the undergraduate studies. You have to actually discuss this with your university of choice. You've got to contact them. You've got to go through they've got various departments that help the students. Some of it's online, some of it, you can go and discuss it with them. On the whole, it's not terribly well organized, so it is a very difficult process. I'm very grateful that my eldest daughter managed the process pretty well. She did a lot of the work on her own, so she has helped her siblings through each process as well. So I've got an in-house advisor. She was actually here this Sunday helping my daughter do all her requirements. They submitted everything online, and took them the whole day, but they got everything done. So we just wait now for the response. So you have to actually do a lot of research to know what it is you need to give to the university for your child to get in. So that's basically the university entrance requirements. I don't want to go into what you need to do for each kind of field of study or undergraduate course, because that's going to be a tremendous amount. So basically,
that's a separate webinar on its own.
Yeah, very much so. So basically, you got to approach the tertiary institution of your choice and find out what is it that they want from your child in order for them to gain access. That's it. And then you have to cater for it. And what you haven't done, you now start doing. And you need to do this at least by the time you're in grade 11. You can't wait till the year you're in matric to start.
Right.
What was the other part of your question? Have I answered enough?
So I think you did give me a good response in terms of what should parents be doing if they're looking to, get their kids to university. The other point was, what is internationally recognized? So what are the senior certificate options? So if you're matriculating, there's the national senior certificate, there's A levels, AS levels. What does it mean, and what does it allow you to qualify for in terms of university entrance?
Okay, so South Africa has a national curriculum, and they work to a national curriculum statement, and this dictates exactly what the kids have to know according to what the government has outlined as the requirements, for what the kids have to do, and that is the CAPS curriculum. The CAPS curriculum is given in all public and all private schools. That is the only South African offering that we have, except that the IEB in private schools, it's also CAPS. It's just examined slightly differently, and it's taught slightly differently. In an IEB school, they go into a little bit more detail, and it's slightly more analytical, and they expect of the student to have not just the facts and figures to write the exams, but they need to be able to discuss it a bit more, and they need to be able to apply their knowledge in a slightly more abstract way. So they might give them a circumstantial question instead of give me the answer, which means they'd have to discuss it. So there's a lot more mastery involved in that. That's just the South African component.
Just for our listeners, what is IEB? Because I don't think everybody will know the acronym.
I think it stands for, it's an independent electoral board. It's basically a separate examining body. It's both CAPS. It's just, I noticed that some people like
independent examination board.
Independent, that's right, yeah. So they just examine the same CAPS slightly differently.
In a different way. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's basically it. But it's all CAPS, it's all South African.
Okay. But I want my child to go to university in the UK. Can I write this IEB exam, and will that be accepted for university acceptance into the University of Warwick, for example?
Okay, that's the loaded question. The South African, our curriculum is not recognized everywhere. So you need to actually, there isn't a list that exists that I could give you. And if I did give you a list, it would be what was relevant today, and by the end of the week, it might have changed. So if you want your child to go to a university that is overseas, you need to contact that university and ask them, do you accept the National Senior Certificate CAPS, or must it be IEB? And what are the grade levels that my child has to have for which subjects to get into which undergraduate study? It gets very complex. So no, there isn't an answer for that. But yes, South African education is accepted in most places overseas as a matric qualification.
Right.
That is a South African counterpart.
Okay. I think, the reason I'm asking these questions, and I want Rebecca to go into it, is because I know there are a lot of parents who are mindfully investigating homeschool, and not a lot of them are convinced yet around how that would translate post homeschooling for their kids in terms of university. What will happen to them after that? They're not all going to join the circus and become a trapeze artist. They can actually go to university because they will have a well-rounded education, but that is in your hands. So if you know your child is showing a passion and aspirations for mechanical engineering, for example, then choose curriculum, choose learnings that will help him or her understand that concept further. And if their intention is to become a motor mechanic, okay, fine. What do I need to know to be able to work on a car engine? Or if he wants to pursue it academically, contact the university. I would suggest do it, start your investigations if your child is in the grade 10, 11 phase, right? Start it. Figure out how to help him so he can be or she can be well prepared if that is their intended route, okay? So unfortunately, guys, as we're going through this, you're learning it is not, a cut and dried approach. Homeschooling really is where we are involved in our kids' education holistically, so it's not as easy as just dropping them off somewhere and then hoping that they'll come out on the other side perfectly well. It really is holding their hand and going through approaches with them, letting them understand and learn, and hopefully they actually become independent learners and they show you where their passions lie and you help to continue guiding them. Okay, so we've been speaking a lot now around curriculum, choices, examinations, and so on. Roxanne, this is for you. I know you have 2 kids that are homeschooling, and you also mentioned, doing an eclectic approach. I think we actually spoke quite a bit about eclectic approach now. But tell me, in your home, what do you find, and you also mentioned you use an eclectic approach at the beginning, what do you find as helpful resources for your girls? Something that you can share with our participants today.
Thank you, Davina. For us, by taking the holistic approach to schooling and development, it allows me to address my child as a whole and as an individual. So it allows me to decipher what would work for them and what wouldn't. And when it comes to resources, I have chosen an eclectic approach because we have used everyday opportunities as learning opportunities. We have chosen everyday exploration as learning opportunities. I mean, Rayanta said it beautifully where they baked a cake and, a math lesson was there. I want to share one of the stories with my kids that we came across that was a beautiful learning experience. So we decided to take a nature walk one day, which is something we love doing because my kids are free-spirited and they're nature-loving. So I know that if I take them out to nature, they're going to be relaxed, they're going to be calm, and it allows for them to absorb knowledge a little bit better. So on our nature walk, while we're walking, we approached a field of wildflowers. And the very first thing that came up was, Mom, how do plants and how do trees grow? And to that, my answer was photosynthesis. And then they asked me, what is photosynthesis? And there, at that very point in time where we were, like in that point, in that field where we stood, we immediately started with a lecture on photosynthesis. We started on a full-blown lesson on how plants use and organisms, including humans, need energy to fuel the metabolic reactions of growth, development, and reproduction. So that's what happened there at that point in time, because an interest was piqued. There was a curiosity that I saw in my child, and I used it as an opportunity. Now, being eclectic allows us to do that. It gives us the freedom to choose materials, resources of various in various curricula. It allows us to use various opportunities and options to learn. And this has had an amazing result for us. I mean, like many, we have chosen, our set curricula for subjects like maths. We use Khan Academy religiously. That is one of my go-tos for mathematics. But we have decided that everything just flows and everything is a learning opportunity, and we have used that in our day-to-day experiences. We troll bookstores Any type of book that we find and it looks interesting, we pick it up, we buy it, and we start reading. There's no set reading books for my children. And by doing that, it has allowed my kids to have a love for reading because they are allowed to choose their genre. So it has allowed my kids to explore different aspects. And like you said, I mean, we've explored the beauty of eclectic homeschooling. And I know that approach doesn't work for many. And parents must understand that even though we sound like we're advocating for eclectic homeschooling, that might not work for every single child.
Correct.
Because some children will fare better with a box curriculum approach, where they might not fare better with an eclectic approach. And I think Sonia would agree with me that finding your child's balance, understanding who your child is one of the first steps that parents should take in actually, before they actually decide the route and the path they will take in their homeschooling journey.
Okay, beautifully put. And just for all the parents online, there is an exhaustive list of resources, both, not just curriculum providers, but I'm talking about exhaustive list of websites, YouTube channels, blogs, and different Facebook forums, etc. What we are going to do for you is I've asked my panelists to share with me all their go-to resources. Right, I have consolidated a list which I am going to share with all of you, at the end of this. So it will actually help you, further investigate some of the concepts. Like I said, we can't unpack all of this in great detail now because of the time limitations that we have. So before I continue, I want to touch on a few misconceptions regarding homeschooling. And one of the biggest misconceptions that I continuously encounter actually is around socialization. Are homeschooling kids socially well adjusted compared to their formal counterparts, formal schooling counterparts? Roxanne, I would like you to take that, please.
Thank you, Davina. I agree with you. There are many myths doing the rounds with regards to homeschoolers being unsocialized. Now, many individuals feel that by not being a part of a formal classroom filled with peers will result in the little ones becoming socially awkward. Now, this is a genuine concern, but one that has been debunked time and time again. Apart from various studies conducted within our homeschooling community, the very developed ability to socialize and clear communication skills that have been displayed amongst many of our homeschool children has been proven beyond a doubt. Now, to genuinely address this concern, we must ask ourselves, what is meant by socialization? Socialization not only refers to social interaction, and I think this is where the lines become blurred, because people feel that for my child to be socially adequate, they need to have consistent and continuous social interaction. But that is not where it ends. Social interaction and the understanding and learning how to navigate a society's norms and rules of behavior all fall under the bracket of socialization. Now, as I mentioned before, this is a much needed skill and is usually met with the need for interaction with classmates in a school setting. What many parents fail to see is that the skill is a natural ability that is developed through daily observation, exposure, and healthy interactions. Now, to say that all homeschool children are as skilled or even more so than mainstream learners and vice versa would truly be an unfair comparison. As I mentioned before, being a homeschool graduate myself meant that I was exposed and fell victim to teasing and bullying in a formal education setting. But I've also been exposed to the isolation that was brought on by being homeschooled. Now, not all children succumb to the pressure or the ill treatment from their peers and mainstream, bullying. And many mainstream kids do blossom into social butterflies, and they are fully grounded and they're ready to take on the world. And in that same way, many homeschoolers are also not socially adept. They are fully grounded too. Now, one thing I want to bring across to the parents is that the development of the skill, the socialization skill in your child, is one that falls on your responsibility. It becomes your responsibility as a parent to ensure that this need is met. Now, before any parent freaks out about the pressure that this places on them, I want you to remember that socialization has a very clear meaning. Socialization is the process through which people are taught to be proficient members of a society. Now, homeschool children can be well socialized in terms of both peer interaction and learning cultural norms by creating opportunities for this to develop. It is the parent's responsibility to create the opportunities for socialization to occur. Now, children are natural imitators, and a great deal of their character development comes from those who are modeling behavior. Now, and also we do know that a child's first reference now to act in public comes directly from their parents. And this is where the responsibility of the parent comes in, to be a social model for their child, but in a positive way. Now, in my opinion, homeschooling will drastically change your child's social skills, but in an incredibly positive way. The reason I say this is because we cannot shelter our kids, and we can't helicopter parent either, but we can be involved as homeschooling parents in the influences that surround them. With more opportunities to socialize, with larger groups of diversity within that social circles, it allows your child to develop stronger respect, understanding, and a clear ability to communicate with children and adults alike. One of the most beautiful characteristics of a homeschool child is their capacity to interact with people of all ages, from siblings and parents to friends old and young, and even community leaders. I've seen them speak up for themselves because they have the ability, they are not afraid. There's no inhibitions, there's no judgment, there's no discrimination, and they're confident in their interactions. And this is only because they have the freedom to express themselves, where not to put down mainstream education. Like I said, there's pros and cons to each one, but them being in a homeschool environment allows them to be more open and allows them to be more free. And I'm going a bit off topic, but I want to share my experience with everybody. You know, I missed my friends a lot when I started homeschooling. When my mom and I personally decided to take the plunge in homeschool, my first month was exciting, second month was okay, and the third month I felt totally alone. Now, my mom was a full-time working parent, and all I had was my online tutors, my computer, and my books. So I lived a very isolated life for the first few months of homeschooling. But
so
then I decided...
Roxanne, sorry to interrupt you, because you just mentioned something very important, and it's actually going to address a question that's come in from one of the parents to ask, if both parents are working, is it still possible for a caregiver or somebody to be there to help continue the child to continue their education? And what you've just mentioned, that your mom worked full time and you were managing your schooling.
Look, in my instance, because I was over the age of 16, schooling then becomes the responsibility of the child. You know, there's no governing body that says you are not allowed to leave school at the age of 16. Now, I hadn't left, but I chose in correspondence study as opposed to the social formal, well, not the social, but the formal education setting, mainly because I was bullied and I was teased, and I had a very, very bad experience at high school, and you know, it wasn't something that I wanted to continue. So that was my option. Now, when it comes to parents with younger kids, I'm not sure on the legalities, and I think maybe Rebecca can confirm or maybe give more insight in that. But I do believe that as a parent, you know what is good for your child, and if you are taking on this homeschooling journey, that you need to consider the measures that need to be put in place. You need to consider that I am working, but with me working, is my child's education going to come first? And this is where tutors, this is where caregivers, but adequate caregivers, au pairs, this is where they all come in. Someone mentioned early on, exactly, and grandparents. Someone mentioned early on that there's a lot of grad students that are available to offer themselves up for this particular reason as au pairs. And this is where I go back to saying that social interaction, education, and anything that you do with regards to your kids becomes your responsibility. And a lot of parents need to realize that this journey is not just about taking my child out and putting them in front of a computer and having them learn. This is about taking your child into this lifestyle and becoming a socially conscious and aware and mindful parent for your child.
Beautifully said. That is the education of the whole child, and that is what we are talking about. That's not just the academic side. Just to add to the just to close on the topic around socialization, I know with my two boys, they again, I started this journey and I was so clueless and I was so unaware of so many things, because this was one of my concerns as well, that they weren't going to be at school every day seeing their friends and, running around and playing. But when I met that first parent who was a homeschooler, it was like, I was so excited, because she opened up to me and she told me about ice skating that happens once a month. There is paintball, there's adventure golf, there's picnics at Emarentia Dam, for example, or, outings to the zoo and to Saibono. And there is actually so much of social interaction happening with homeschooling kids. There was a point towards the latter part of last year where I actually said to my boys, I was like, you know what, guys, okay, we can't do all the social stuff now, because we actually need to seriously sit and do some work also. So I started reducing them, because there is, and it's it's amazing. And what was so great is that they are meeting kids from all over with different interests and cultures and vibes. And it's it was so amazing. So just to alleviate any concerns around your child's going to be too lonely, they're not going to have friends. You know what? Again, like what Roxanne said, just to summarize, it is your responsibility. There is a lot of groups and forums, right, that we can introduce you to if you are going to become a homeschooling parent, that you'll be added to all over South Africa, not just in Gauteng, not just in the Western Cape, all over. There are lots of groups where you can take your kids on these amazing, outings, but they also become learning outings at the same time. So please don't feel that your child is going to be isolated. In fact, they'll probably find a lot more friends that are a lot more like-minded and, show a lot more caring and maturity with them. That's, in my personal opinion, that's what I found. Then just to close on the question around whether we can homeschool if we are full-time working parents. I know of a few parents that are working full-time and that are managing to have their kids' school at home. This, again, comes back to you, what options you want to choose for your child. You can do the au pair route. You can do the grandparent route, perhaps, or a caregiver that is sufficiently able to assist your child and direct your child. But that being said, a lot of this then helps your child become an independent learner. And I would hope that that's what your journey is, with the approach to homeschooling. So it is very possible. Please investigate further on what your options can be in order to do this if you are a full-time working parent. And there is concepts, while we're not touching on it in this webinar, there are concepts like tutor centers and sort of homeschooling centers. We can do a separate session on that altogether, but there are various options. So I will ask you to please do a little bit of investigation. Now,
Davina, can I just mention something while you're on that topic?
Yes, please go ahead.
We just need to bear in mind what is legal and what is illegal. And at the moment, you are allowed to homeschool your child. And the definition of that is the parent is facilitating the education of their own child in their own home. So if you work full time and you drop your child off somewhere else for the day, that is technically illegal. It's actually not allowed. I know that a lot of people do that, but we're in a gray area because there exists a very huge need for that. And the problem we have is that we don't actually have laws that can cater for that. So there isn't a law saying it's not allowed, but there's also not laws saying that it is allowed. So by default, it is illegal. And especially for the younger grades, the big problem with that is that homeschooling, you have to have your child registered for homeschooling if they are between the age of 7 and 15, which is grade 1 to grade 9. After that, a child can leave school of their own free will at the age of 15, and then you can do the further education and training as you want. But that is currently set to change according to the new laws that the Bella Bill and the policy will be bringing in. But at the moment, we're still working on the old laws. So when it comes to younger children, the complication with this is when you're leaving your child in the care of someone else, it ceases to be an issue of education, but it now becomes an issue of child care, which means the people that look after the child, it's a separate legal issue completely. So the people who look after the child need to be vetted. It's got nothing to do with the education. They might be fantastic teachers or able to teach your child, but that's besides the point. So the government needs some kind of system whereby they can make sure that people who leave their children essentially with strangers have got the correct processes by which to make sure that those people are safe if the children are young, and then also that they're qualified to do the teaching. So we must be careful not to tell people that they can just get an au pair and the kids can sit at home, because there has to be some kind of follow-up. And also you can't drop your child off anywhere. If you're homeschooling and your child is registered as a homeschooler, as a parent, no matter what you do with your child, you still remain accountable. So if the school you've put your child in is not registered and the government finds the school, which they do from time to time, they close the school down. They might impose a small fine on the school, but they are actually able to prosecute you as a parent for making that choice. The school doesn't get prosecuted because the accountability rests with you, not with the school.
Okay, that is an extremely important point.
It is, yes.
It is. And that actually brings me to my next question, where I was hoping you would address that, Rebecca, is parents actually just want to know where to start. What should they know in where to start? So, for example, my kid is in mainstream school. I want to go through this approach of homeschooling. And like we mentioned at the very beginning, we're speaking about homeschooling, not tutor centers, and we're not touching on, homeschooling centers. We're speaking about actual schooling your child, at home yourself. So what should the parent be mindful of if they want to remove their child from a mainstream school and then continue with the homeschooling educational journey?
Thank you. To start with, you have to again start with the end in mind. So if you're removing your child from school, you have to have made the decision now that you're going to not put them back into school. And based on your ultimate goal, you will be able to decide where to start, because now you've got your map that you're going to work towards. So obviously, if you've removed your kids from a mainstream schooling, I would advise a period of deschooling. It does tend to be a contentious issue whereby people believe it's not necessary, but I think one needs to play it by ear, depending on your child, what the circumstances are for the child leaving the school. For instance, if there's a situation of trauma, I would recommend a deschooling period where the child would have to go for possibly therapy, where the parent and child can reestablish their relationship, and the child can grow a better perspective and attitude towards their school, because they're not going to learn anything anyway if they are upset or traumatized or unhappy. They won't retain the information. And then if they are in high school, they would start with the work they were doing. But if you take them out of junior school, then you've got a lot more leeway to look at the various curriculums and consider the various approaches that you would like to implement. So again, it would be a tremendous amount of research, But when you leave the school, you basically have to go to the school and tell them you're going to homeschool. So you deregister the child. Some of the schools will give you a letter to say that this is the transfer letter. You do not need the transfer letter to start homeschooling. I know some schools say that you do, but it's not true. You just need to inform them that you're removing them and you're now exercising your right to choose another form of schooling. It would be the same as if you move your child from a public school to a private school or a private school to a public school. You're just changing the format, and you don't need permission to do that. So you can just take the leap, start schooling. You can register your child with the Department of Education. They don't always get back to you quickly, so you just do your registration online. Make sure you have recorded that you made the effort, and then when they get back to you, then you can tell them this is what we did, this is how we started, this is where we are right now, and you take it from there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you for addressing that. So we are actually coming to the end of our session. Before I do, and before I go into a summary and closing, when people were RSVPing, I asked them to submit questions that they would like, the panel to address. While I think the panel has addressed quite a few aspects of, homeschooling and questions that came through from the emails, I want to just read a few questions that come in and direct them through to our panelists. So the first question comes from Kim. Kim didn't tell me where she's from, but her questions are, my boys are registered with Impact. Impact is a curriculum provider, just for those who didn't know. So my boys are registered with Impact. Should we still join the Pestalozzi Trust? Rebecca, would you firstly tell people what the Pestalozzi Trust is and then answer Kim's question?
Okay, this is a very common question, and it comes with some misconceptions. When a parent removes a child from school and they're now going to homeschool, they register with the Department of Education, so their child is registered as that type of schooler. That's got nothing to do with the curriculum you use or the service provider you use. You registered your child to homeschool, and that's between you and the Department of Education. It's a contract, an agreement as a parent. You're now undertaking to educate your child. That is separate from the curriculum you might choose. Impact is one of the service providers. They provide the CAPS curriculum right the way from grade R all the way through to matric. It's quite a good curriculum provider in that they are very strict about aligning with the national curriculum statement. So the government is very happy with what they provide because it's sort of similar to, they try to be similar to what they're doing in schools anyway. So if you register with Impact, that doesn't mean you've registered to homeschool. That means you've registered to be one of their members to buy their product. And I think the misconception comes in with the word register. If you're buying something, you have, you're a member of that organization. So that's not the same as saying that you're now legal because you've told the government what you're doing. So if you registered with a service provider, you still have to register with the Department of Education because it's not the same matter at all. We shouldn't confuse the two. Now, the Pestalozzi Trust is an organization who've been very involved with all the legal aspects of homeschooling for, I think, over 2 decades now. They started, I think, before it was even legal to homeschool. So they are a legal defense fund where you also register with them like you would with Impact. It's a membership basis. And you pay them an annual fee, and as a legal defense fund, they undertake to protect your rights to homeschool, because you have a right to homeschool, just like you have a right to put your child in private school if you don't want them in public school. It's a matter of choice. So if you get into trouble from the Department of Education or the welfare organization, or your doctor doesn't like that you're not giving your child antibiotics or something and you get reported, they often go for you because you're a homeschooler. And if they bring this homeschooling thing up, the Pestalozzi Trust are the people who would now defend your right to homeschool. They obviously can't discuss the other stuff if the social workers and stuff get involved. That's a separate matter. but they are a legal defense fund, and many people choose to become members with them. But the thing is, you have to become a member with the Pestalozzi Trust before you have any hassles because of the legal complications. Once you have an existing case, you can't now go and get legal insurance for something you already know exists. So you need to start that early on in your process. Most people take their children out of school, they go and join the Pestalozzi Trust, then they register with the Department of Education if that's what they do, if they want to do, and they start homeschooling, and they normally don't hear from the Department of Education for months, up to sometimes years. They phoned me once, right in the beginning of my homeschooling journey, somewhere in 2009, and I never heard from them again. And it's been over 12 years now, so it's been long. I was a member with the Pestalozzi Trust for most of that time, but my kids are kind of grown up now, and well, I feel I can defend myself quite happily. Yeah, so you should go look on their website to see what the Pestalozzi Trust can offer you. All the information is there. And registering with a service provider is not the same as registering with the Department of Education. And that's also not the same as registering with Pestalozzi Trust. These things are all different aspects, and they cater for different things within the jurisdiction of homeschooling in completely different ways.
Okay, I think that was a very, very good explanation. So guys, please do yourself a favor. We will send out the links to the Pestalozzi Trust so you can go and do a little bit more research. You could probably even get into contact with somebody from the Pestalozzi Trust if you have more in-depth questions around it. So I strongly advise you to make sure you go and find out, you know, the information regarding the legality, regarding the membership fee, as well as registering with the Department of Education. Understand what it is that you need to do. We will provide you with the links to all of these, you know, sites so that you find all of the additional information that you need. Okay, so that actually goes, you know, that answers quite a few of the other questions that came through from parents. I have one more. This is from Rushana Salih. She asks, please confirm if you have to register with the DBE if you plan on homeschooling. Rebecca, I'm going to throw that one back at you.
Okay, this is another loaded one. I'm going to speak about it from two perspectives. Firstly, from our own personal perspective, and then from the official perspective. Officially, according to law, you are required to register your child with the Department of Education when you remove them from a formal institution who would otherwise do the registration for you. The reason for this is the Department of Education wants to know where the children are. It is about census statistics and also making sure the children are kept safe. So that's the basic crux of the matter. They want to know that your kids are actually getting an education. So I feel that their reasons are quite good. I can't fault any of that. I'm in agreement with that. So they're not out to stop everybody from homeschooling. Now, this is part of the problem. Now, the process of registration is fraught with tremendous amount of hurdles in that the laws surrounding it in the various acts don't all coincide with each other and speak to each other in a coherent way, so that it tends to infringe on some of your parental rights, as well as it tends to bind your children to a future agreement which can be changed at any date. So personally, I did not register for homeschooling with the Department of Education because I realized in reading all of the laws and what they're asking of me, the requirements and stuff like that, some of it is downright discriminatory that I feel other people don't have a right to know about my family. So I felt it was an invasion of my privacy as a legal entity, and as well as my children's privacies. And since I am the custodian of their future reputations, I've got to be very careful what I bind them to. So for myself, I didn't agree with the registration process. I joined the Pestalozzi Trust. But the thing is, the law says you have to register. But it also says in the law that you must register unless you have a good reason not to. And therein is a loophole. It's a very, very big topic. We're not going to discuss it today because it can keep us busy all night. But I use that for myself to not register unless I am compelled to at some point in time. If the Department of Education, well, they know that I didn't register. I was actually there. I was at one of the meetings and I told them I don't register, and they just looked at me. They didn't actually do anything. They kind of had this uncomfortable smile and sort of, oh, moving along, let's talk about something else now. So they are very much aware of me, but they do know that I have a specific standpoint, and they do know that I will personally put up a fight, and there's nothing that they can use against me in terms of my children's education or welfare where they could wedge any reason in to approach me. They would have to outright confront me with, why are you not registering? And then I will deal with that in terms of the law, which I think I feel comfortable with doing it. But I don't think parents must take this on if they are at all unsure. This is not something you must do, especially if you've got little children. It is a scary thing. I've spent many years reading about it, and it took me a very long time to get to that point. I had a tremendous amount of help in terms of discussing this with the Pestalozzi Trust, their representatives, and other parents who have done similar things. So it's not something I just woke up and decided to do, and it's not something I did because other parents are doing it. It was very much something I decided based on my circumstances with my own reasons. And that is actually the most pertinent fact if you're going to make a choice like that. Yeah, so that is the legal aspect of it.
Okay. So I think we're actually running out of time now, and I would like to round up in the last 13 minutes that we have. So guys, at the very beginning, I set out the clear expectations and outcomes for this intro to homeschooling. And I hope that we've been able to give you a real highlight and understanding around what homeschooling entails. It really is an involved process, so don't be under any a misunderstanding or misconceptions that it's going to be a walk in the park. Me, speaking personally, from the time I've started, I have had days where I wake up and I thought to myself, what have I done? Why have I chosen this route? This is crazy. You are going to have days where you feel like you are just doing the wrong thing by your kids. You are going to be like, you know what, I want to give up. But let me tell you something. This is so normal. This is just the persona and the anxieties and the stresses of a homeschooling parent. But I can tell you that if you are choosing to go down this route, it is incredibly rewarding. You're not just looking after your child's academic education, you're actually investing in your child. You're actually creating a different kind of relationship with your child and really giving them an incredible start, foundation to move on in life. They will become, or my ambition with my homeschooling, my purpose that I'm doing it is because I want to empower both my kids to become independent learners, to find their passions through understanding the world around them, not to be bottled into one way of learning, right? To be able to explore and then become lifelong learners, not just until they finish school or until they finish university. So it becomes, a bigger whole child, addressing. So to summarize, what have we discussed? We have covered aspects of costs. We have covered aspects of curriculums. We've covered aspects of socialization and sports and support resources and online tools and the first steps you should take if you are considering this homeschooling journey. I actually think we covered quite a lot, and we've given you a really good intro to homeschooling. What I will be doing, because there is quite a lot more in-depth discussions to have, if any of you are really serious about going on this journey and have more questions, as part of registering for this webinar, you will be receiving, I mentioned, that full exhaustive list of resources, curriculum providers, service providers, YouTube channels that we use, all of that goodies. Plus, I will be sharing with you the details, contact details for all my panelists. Remember, I said to you, we are just parents trying to help other parents. So we are really happy to share our contact details with you so we can take more, detailed discussions offline and give you more insights and inspiration, even if that's what you need. So thank you very much for joining. We've tried to address most of the questions. I think we did address all of them, actually. And I'm really, really glad that you've taken this opportunity to come and explore what is homeschooling. So we're going to close for today. I want to say thank you so much to my panelists. Ladies, you were awesome. Thank you very much for dedicating so selflessly your time and wanting to help and share your knowledge. I know how daunting it is when we first start to do these investigations and you feel all alone and you just want to find that one person who can help you and share information with you. And I hope today we've helped all of these parents by sharing lots of information. So I will be sending out links. Hopefully the video recording worked, and I will be editing and sending that video recording to you as well. So to the parents, good night. Thank you very much for staying with us and listening. And I wish you very well with your further explorations and investigations into homeschooling. And please don't hesitate to contact us once we share our contact details with you. Okay? Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.